very good theme, conquering the subtle forms of Maya. So are we ready for that? Are we still dealing with the gross forms of Maya? No. Finished, all the gross forms are finished. Just the subtle forms to deal with. In thinking about this topic, I was aware that even before you can think about the effort that you need to make to conquer subtle forms of Maya, you first of all need the power to discern the subtle forms of Maya, right? Because if you can't even see that subtlety, then how are you going to start to do the work that you need to do? And I think all of us have had this experience that as we progress in Gyan, and Daddy mentioned this morning in relation to the Murli, that what we're doing is we're going through a process, not just through our Gyan life, but even throughout the whole day. We're going through a process of cleaning out the mirror that's inside of us so that we can see clearly what it is that we need to do, what it is that we need to change. And sometimes I know when we start to think about the subtle weaknesses or the subtle mayas that are within that we have to deal with, we can begin to get a little bit heavy. Do you ever get heavy about those things? Yes. And I was asking Baba, what is it that's so important about this theme? And the thought came, the answer, the importance is not to get heavy while looking at those subtle forms of Maya and figuring out how to conquer them. And for myself, the way I have prevented that heaviness, not always successfully, of course. Once you get a little heavy, well, you then have to make a lot of effort to get yourself out of it. But prevention is always better than cure. And to look at the subtleties of Maya as simply things that prevent you from experiencing the fullness of happiness, the fullness of joy, the fullness of power that Baba wishes to give you. It's another way of cleaning out to enjoy my absolutely full inheritance from Baba. Sometimes when we look at subtle weaknesses, we almost use that form of checking. I'm using the word weaknesses, Maya, weaknesses. In a way, it made more sense to me personally to think about subtle weaknesses. That is the form that the subtle forms of Maya take, right? Sometimes when we do that kind of checking, we can check with an attitude that tells us the more I unearth the layers, the more I begin to see the subtle weaknesses inside, or I begin to see the subtle mayas that I'm affected by. I have that subtle attitude that tells me I'm not a good Brahmin, I'm not a good BK, I should be doing better. Do you feel like that sometimes when you see those subtle weaknesses? No? Or you say, great, no problem. And that kind of attitude or that kind of feeling, when I'm looking at those subtle weaknesses, they are the things that's the kind of they're the kind of feelings that will actually make the weaknesses stronger. We have to weaken our weaknesses, not strengthen our weaknesses. So we have to strengthen our strengths, not weaken our strengths, right? And again, this is a very subtle question of a subtle attitude towards the self. That if I look, and as I look, I increase that weak feeling or weak thoughts about myself as I look at the subtle weaknesses, or the subtle mayas, if you like, then I'm actually going to find it much more difficult to get rid of them. And what I have discovered for myself, or what I've learnt to do for myself when I see things inside that I know subtly are really draining my energy within. Sometimes I see them for myself, that's good. Sometimes others point them out to me. Of course, if you're with someone like Daddy, she will very quickly want to point those things out to you and make you aware for your own benefit. Now, this is the next level you need to go to. And Daddy's doing that all the time with us while we're in Madhavan. So we have a very good opportunity to understand what it is we have to do. But also, I'm sure this has happened to all of you, and certainly would have happened to all of you who are instruments in Baba's work, and particularly living in centres. There are very often times when other people sit you down and tell you exactly what your weaknesses are and what are the mayas that you're going through. Who's had that experience? I know I have. And literally, at the very beginning of Gyan, I was literally, it wasn't just, a comment, but I was literally sat down, and there were 3 sisters who sat and told me a big long list of all my weaknesses. Thankfully it was now about 25 years ago, so I've got over it. But you can imagine I was very new in Gyan, very young, and I thought I was doing everything so wonderfully. I had no concept of what was going on. It wasn't very easy. And this is because subtle Maya is so clever that it causes us, it eludes us. It makes us live in an illusion. And when the illusion is shattered, it's painful. Actually, there was a very nice story that I heard from a Greek Orthodox monk a few weeks ago. And we were chatting about subtle ego. And he was telling this, he told me this story about a monk. Now, in the Greek Orthodox Church, monks are very strict. He is actually a monk from Mount Athos, which is in Greece. And only males are allowed on Mount Athos, not even female animals are allowed on that. It's very, very strict. So needless to say, I haven't been there to tell you what it's like. And there was this monk, and they live in a little cell, and they do a lot of prayer and silence. And he'd been a monk for many years, but he had this desire inside that he wanted to become a bishop. And normally monks in the Greek Orthodox Church then don't become bishops, but they have a monk's life. But he had this desire. He wanted to be a bishop. He wanted that status. And one night he never told anybody, but it was deep inside, this desire. And one night he was praying in his cell, and then it was quite late at night, and somebody came and knocked on the door of the cell and said, "Oh, the patriarch has come," the head of the Greek Orthodox Church. "He's come in a big boat with many priests and bishops, and he wants you to come out of your cell and come onto the boat. He wants to make you a bishop." I said, "Oh, no, okay." So he got himself ready and he went out, and sure enough, near the shore was a big boat, and the patriarch was welcoming him. And so there was a little gap he had to just cross over to step into the boat. And so he made the sign of the cross, and then he stepped to go into the boat, and then the whole thing disappeared and he just fell in the water. And what was that? The illusion of our ego can be so strong that we really think everybody thinks we're so wonderful and wants to make us, okay, in this case not a bishop, maybe a daddy. But you don't become that through your own desire. But the illusion can be so strong. Maya can be so strong. And I thought this was a very nice story because sometimes, and I'm sure, as I say, I've been through this, you desire to do something. Who's had a desire to do something? It's not a pure thought, it's a desire. And you know how you can tell the difference? When there's just a pure thought to do something, well, actually, often it just gets fulfilled and it's very natural. But the testing point is, if I have a pure thought to do something, then if it doesn't happen, I don't take any sorrow. It's okay, my stage is the same. But if I have a desire to do something, then if that doesn't happen, if that desire isn't fulfilled, then there's sorrow inside, there's disappointment. And that's the difference. And sometimes our desires can be so deceptive that we think we're worthy of something and it should come to me, and why doesn't it come to me? But it's all an illusion. And sometimes, even if that desire is fulfilled, okay, you want to do this, go ahead and do it, fine, do what you want to do. Even if that desire is fulfilled, it's a bit like the mirage of the boat. When you get to it, it's not that pleasant. Who's had that experience? I have. When you actually get to it, you realize that it's not really what you wanted. And the thing is, where Maya, I feel, subtly deceives us is where we start to translate the things that we want internally. And what do we really want internally? I think the biggest thing that we want and we need, a want and a need, is what Baba mentioned in the last Murli of the 5th of March. Self-sovereignty. If you have that, you have everything, actually. You not only have the beautiful experiences of the present, but you also gain the high status of the future. Everything is contained within self-sovereignty. And sometimes, in an urge to attain self-sovereignty, I translate that desire, or pure desire in this case, into external desires. And that's where Maya can really give me a great deal. I translate in my mind self-sovereignty into an external position or an external recognition, or even an external desire to please everybody, or an external desire to have everybody like me. We translate our real deep spiritual needs, which are things of the unlimited that we need to take from unlimited Baba, into things of very limited desires that we then seek through very limited means. And then, of course, even though those limited things of position or regard or whatever may be fulfilled, there's never a feeling of satisfaction inside. And I was struck today, of course, Baba in the Murli was talking about the gross vices, the explosions of anger and lust, and well, Baba said actually lust can be hidden, but anger and greed can't be hidden, right? Baba said this morning. And then Daddy said a very significant thing. Why is it that there is anger? It's because inside there's dissatisfaction or discontent or hopelessness. Now you think about it when somebody's angry. Okay, when you get angry, now I'm not up to now, thanks to Baba, a very angry person, but I can get irritated at times. But why? You know, if I look at it on any level, it's because something in me is not fulfilled. Otherwise, again, we always look at our daddies as examples. I've just had the great fortune to be with Daddyji in Benares, and now, of course, in between Daddy wasn't well, so then, as far as I know, the news is that she's coming soon now back. and everything is fine. But I was observing several things, but because the daddies have let go of the battles and everything else, and it's time for us to let go of all our battles too, because they are totally satisfied within with everything they have from Baba. There's no need for them to use force or pressure in achieving anything. I've seen Dadiji, and in fact I've observed this over a long time with her. I remember once seeing somebody coming to ask her something, and even I could understand that this was really something that wasn't a right thing to be doing. And Daddy just sort of nodded and acknowledged. And it was so loving. She didn't say to that person no, but she acknowledged them in such a way that they felt they were accepted, and they themselves realized almost instantly, Daddy, I shouldn't be doing this. A very loving way of dealing with everything. She didn't need to force anything. And I see this in the daddies. Okay, fine. Let us, with that love, everything gets transformed, everything reaches a natural level of rightness, like a spirit level. It comes back to its level. Love enables everything to come into order and into the right level. I was very struck when Sister Genti was sharing with the teachers last night, with a few teachers, and she was saying, talking about her experiences of when Daddy first left to come to London in to come back to India after 4 years away. She'd been in London, I think you know the story, Daddy Janki now, she couldn't, to get residency, she couldn't leave the country. And so 4 years she didn't come back to Madhuban, 4.5 years. Then in 1978 she came to Madhuban after that time. And so for Sister Genti it was the first time being alone in a sense with that responsibility. And I hadn't heard this before, but she said that the way she discussed it with Daddy was that she'd say yes to everything unless there was a very good reason to say no. And then, if there was, then they'd discuss it. I actually wanted to ask her last night, how would you discuss it? Because it wasn't possible to phone Mount Abu in those days, so I might ask her that at some point, but maybe the discussion meant letters across the oceans, I don't know. But anyway, but I thought this is a very positive principle, Don't restrict anything. I know I'm going off the topic a little bit, but don't restrict anything, but be generous with everything. Baba's last Aviyat Murali, or the one before, was it? Anyway, within the last couple of weeks, the basis of expansion of service, generosity, being the images of upliftment. So, actually, in a way, it's not off the topic, because it's again subtle fears that cause us to restrict something. It's our subtle insecurities that cause us to restrict something. But as far as possible, unless there's a very good reason, let me say yes, let me be open, let me encourage, let me empower. And that's what the daddies do. I was remembering in the time when we did the 1,000,000 Minutes, it was a very new project, first international project, and a lot of people thought that it wasn't right according to the way in which the yajna had worked up to then, that we work with, contact people so closely. Now we do it all the time, but it was very new in those days. Yes, calling people onto our stage was one thing, but working with people on committees was another. But no matter what others said, the daddies, even though in a way they couldn't know the detail in the sense, is it right or wrong in that sort of external sense, but seeing our bhav, our feelings, our motivation for service, they had trust in us, in the way Baba was using us. And so they never restricted anything. It was always, okay, go ahead, yes, try, new idea, try, do it. Because there's no blockages and no barriers for the daddies. And I was just seeing for myself, the more that I can conquer, well, I don't even in a way like the word conquer, because when you think of conquering something, it really feels like a battle. But when I can recognize and rise above and let go of the subtle mayas that can come to me, that cleaning out process gives me a feeling of security, because I'm able to then really take from Baba and attain my self-sovereignty. And so I don't feel any need to control something or to have something go in a certain way. And I think a lot of us can at times fall prey to this need to control. But actually there's nothing to control. You can't control anything or anyone. Just get to the point where you control yourself, that's good enough. And we feel we need to control something, it has to work in a certain way. And if there's even the slightest attitude of that, I know for myself, very difficult to get cooperation. But when I give love, when I know I'm sharing with love and there's a generosity of spirit in what I'm doing, with the faith that it's Baba's work and Baba's going to know how to use those instruments, let me put my trust in them. Then, in fact, everything works according to order. There's nothing to worry about at all. And I think that's the biggest thing I learned being in Global Cooperation House. Don't try and control anything, just let things move, and anything that you need to know, it'll come to you. It'll come to you naturally, because you're not restricting anything in your attitude. And so I feel about conquering the subtle forms of Maya, or letting go of these subtle forms of Maya, is really very much about taking, cleaning out, so that I can take from Baba in the way in which he wants to give me. I can take in my own restricted way what I think. But if I clean out, and I'll take due to my desires, and Baba came in them really recently, whatever the children want, Baba, if they express it, Amrit Vela, Baba has to give that to them. But what am I restricting in terms of my taking also as well? If I clean out sufficiently, Baba will give me in an unlimited way as he wants to give me, which will be beyond anything I could possibly think of, and that's definitely my experience. I think, okay, getting back to our subject, two things that, Baba said in the Murli on the 5th, that, Baba will give you special help if there's any sanskar you want to burn. Baba will give you help to burn it. And I thought, right, Baba. When I was sitting in front of Baba, I was feeling so good, so good. I thought, I don't know if I have anything. When you're in front of Baba at that time, there's so much love. It was like I just had the whole world, and I had my Baba, and, where are weaknesses? Didn't exist. Then, afterwards, then I remembered, I do have a few weaknesses left. But that's also a key, isn't it? That, just be so filled in Baba's world and you forget about your weaknesses. And then you hope other people forget about them. But actually it's something I know Daddy has mentioned, that really if you forget them, other people will forget them. But then I was thinking, what is it? And there were two things, and I've been, in a way, being away from Madhavan was, I know this sounds really funny to say, but it was time to be away from service and away from anything, and, other things come to you. And of course, even better to be back in Madhavan, so that's definitely there. But there were two things. Well, really right away I thought the sanskara that I really, really need to burn, and I see it coming up in the sense of it's talked about, people expressing this a lot, the sanskara of taking sorrow. Taking sorrow, it's come up. The daddies have been taking it up. Daddy Gulzar takes this up very strongly. It came up in this little meeting last night. It's so subtle, the way in which we take sorrow. And again, what I was realizing about conquering subtle forms of Maya, it's about breaking patterns, breaking habits. And I've seen what Baba and Daddy's done for me recently. They've broken certain patterns of, for example, my trips to Madhuban. The timings have shifted in the last 2 years. Instead of October, it became December, which I never imagined for various reasons. And, you know, last December, I realized, it takes me a long time to I thought, you know, this was Baba's yukti. Baba broke a pattern of something. So even in coming to Madhuban, I didn't expect the same things. There was a different scenario, there was a different, you know, it's different when you come at different times, different people around, different things, you know, responsibilities or different service or different, you know, it's just a different timings, different things are happening. And I saw that Baba was very clever in making me break a certain pattern that had gone on for a few years. Why? Because I needed to break certain patterns in myself, certain patterns of expecting certain things, and certain patterns of going along and doing things in a certain way, in a certain groove, which you can get into even in Madhuban. Certainly we get into in our service places, because in our service places you get into routine. And yes, you need a routine in terms of discipline. That's not a question. But what I've been realizing, again, a subtle form of Maya, you get into a routine of expecting everything to happen in a certain way or doing things in a certain way. And then if there is a weak sanskar, it just carries on. It just carries on and you get used to it. And this thing of taking sorrow, it happens in a very gross way, we all know. You know, something happens and there I am in a flood of tears. Well, hopefully not that gross at this point, but, you know, I can really feel hurt, you know. But on a more subtle level, just feeling, you know, Baba talks about feeling insult, feeling disregarded, feeling a little bit of rejection. And then we say, oh, it's okay, it's fine, you know, I'll just be with Baba. But we don't somehow break out of the pattern. This is what I was realizing for myself. I got used to it, and I'm coping with it, and I'm tolerating it, and I'm dealing with it. But that's not sufficient anymore. If I want to move to another level, I shouldn't just tolerate or accept anything of weakness in myself. Now, this is in a way is going to contradict what I'm going to say in another way too. When I'm checking and looking at my own weaknesses, like I said at the beginning, don't use your own weaknesses as a weapon to make yourself feel worse, you know. That's not what Baba wants us to do. And so in that sense, when I see something subtle inside, let me accept in that sense, okay, it's there, it's fine, but now something new has to happen. Now, whatever is the method I use for that, put myself in a bhatti, or maybe you say, oh, where's the time for that? I can say, where's the time for that? But I'll tell you where's the time for that in my case. It's not extra physical time, but when I'm sitting with Baba for yoga, Amrit Vela, evening, whenever I'm sitting, I can put myself in a bhatti by having real true yoga, real, true focus. As this is another subtle Maya. You sit in yoga and you think of service. How many people does that happen to? And you think, oh, it's okay, I'm just thinking of service. No. What was the Murali the other day where Baba said the Department of Gyan and the Department of Yoga is separate? Definitely the Department of Yoga and the Department of Service is separate. I always say, whenever I'm sharing something in a class, I'm giving class to myself, so I'm not pontificating in that sense. But really, I know where I make extra time. If I need a bhatti, it's within that yoga time. If I can find extra time, great, wonderful, marvelous. And I see Daddy carve out extra time for herself. Incredible discipline. She's got so much that she deals with. But in London in January, 10 till 11 every morning, 1 hour's yoga. She just made the time because that was her commitment. Commitment is another thing. But it's very important. But at that time, where really is my focus, am I able to have yoga and not be lost in thoughts of other things? Yes, if I'm lost in the thoughts of people's sanskaras, well, we know definitely it's not yoga. But if I'm lost in the things of service, sometimes we have a blurry line there. Or lost in thoughts of preparing my stage for service. That's not yoga either. Yoga is being absorbed in Baba. And no other thoughts of anything else to do with what it is I have to do in the world. Then it doesn't come into the category of yoga. If I'm thinking about my interaction with others, my role, my being, my how I am, how I have to be, how I should be, it doesn't come into the category of yoga. I'm externalizing it, my thoughts. Yoga is yoga. And that's where I get power. So where I see I need to break a pattern, let me find whatever method, but taking power from Baba is the main method. But then, of course, seeing that weakness, I want to change it. Maybe I want to take help. And I know for me, the biggest help has been, just honesty. And every class study talks to us about honesty. So if there's something in my mind that I know's not right and I want to unburden myself, well, why hide my weaknesses? What's the point? Hide them, they'll grow. Tell myself, I'm okay, my weaknesses will grow. So write a letter, speak to, whether it's the instrument in your center, daddy, whatever, the daddies make themselves available. Get rid of it. So easy to write it down. I often, say that to people, okay, now just write, in essence, no more than 1 page, write a letter to Daddy and just get rid of it. But write a letter honestly. Some people write a letter, yes, Daddy, I had lots of Maya, and I know it's wrong, but I'm okay now. Well, you're not going to get rid of your Maya like that, and that's not honesty. Or, well, I had a little bit of anger, and I got very angry, I'm okay now. No, what happened, really? What happened? What was the mistake? Say it in essence, very clearly. I did this, I said this, and I shouldn't have. Be very open, very honest in your communication. And then you find that actually, even without your effort, if there's honesty, it'll lift. It's incredible. I had something that had been going on in my mind, and in January, I just told Daddy what was happening, and Baba lifted it. Lifted it, just like magic. Honesty is magic. Don't shy away from it. Very, very important. And otherwise, how can you be light if you're carrying things? You can't. Subtle Maya will eat you, and all our power is drained. So breaking the patterns, and as I say, one of these things, not taking sorrow, breaking that pattern. Don't get used to a certain level of sorrow or a certain level of weak thinking. This was another thing. I was seeing subtly a pattern of weak thinking inside that was causing a strain. Everything's fine, generally, but something's eating away my energy within. And if you look inside, you'll see some weak thought or another is eating away at me. And what did Baba study the Murali of the 5th of March? Baba's vision. Why can't I accept that? Why can't I be that self-sovereign? When we had a panel with the RCOs in the teachers' meeting, there's a very, very powerful thing that came up for me. We asked the question was asked about self-sovereignty, and it was Sister Mohini who mentioned this point. If you're a self-sovereign, then you trust yourself. And then I was asking the question, so I asked Dr. Nirmala, I think, do you trust yourself? And the answer, yes. I asked Gentiben, yes. And yet, but then also Gentiben's answer, I know if I, take a certain decision, and then, and I think this came up recently in the discussions while I've been away about trusting the decisions of seniors and the process of decision making, or maybe it was in the NCO, that, okay, if I take a decision, then, all right, if later on Daddy gives me that signal that it wasn't the right thing, and I need to go back to that person and say, I'm sorry, it wasn't quite the right thing, but actually this is now Daddy's suggestion, or this is the way it should be, it's fine. It's not a thing of loss of pride or anything. In fact, people appreciate it. It's a learning process. People appreciate that you haven't just continued with what you think and had too much pride to go back and reverse a decision, because then the person will lose out. The person you're serving will lose out. And when we're serving souls, it's a question of their life. It's a question of everyone's life. Sometimes we say something and it affects a person's life this way or that way. I've had the experience, somebody comes, thankfully it's usually been only positive, but they said, you said a certain thing to me at a critical point and it helped me so much. I don't remember. But the words of Brahmins have such an impact. And so when I'm serving, I have to serve with so much honesty. But this thing of trusting the self, I just thought that for me was such a key to self-sovereignty. That whatever thoughts arise, whatever decisions I'm taking, let me trust that Baba's training me and using me in the right way. And having trust in myself doesn't mean that I don't verify things with seniors. It actually means I verify things more. I communicate more. Because if I don't trust myself that much, that means, yes, there's some weak thoughts. I take a decision and I doubt, is it right, is it not? My ego won't let me find out if it's right or not. I just want to stick with that. Yeah, it must be right, it'll be okay, it'll be fine, and I carry on. And I miss the subtle signal that's telling me, check it out, confirm it. No, it's very subtle, the signals we get from Baba, and our ego cancels out the signals and says, no, go ahead, it's fine. And then later on we realize it was a mistake, it was wrong. If I'd have checked, I would have saved myself a lot of bother, I would have saved a lot of other people a lot of bother. And so, where I trust myself to come in front of the seniors and say, well, this was the decision I made, or this is the situation, this is what I think. When there's trust inside, we're very open, nothing to hide. When you don't trust yourself, you tend to hide more and cover things up. So trusting the self, I feel, is a way in which is a key to being a self-sovereign. And we can develop that trust by that verification process. It's a very easy method, and we learn. And then we really are able to take on more and more responsibility. It's a process I've seen for myself. There are certain things now that I know are absolutely fine, and I can move ahead, and I don't have a question. I trust it. But I need to be yogyukt enough to know, even though it might be the same situation, similar circumstances, in this particular instance, I have to check it out, to catch the signal. Some slightly different factors. Something's not quite right. Let me check it out. So I'm now trusting my ability to take the subtle signals from Baba. And I always feel as we work on these more subtle, positive levels in our efforts, then the subtle weaknesses, the subtle mayas will become very apparent very easily, and we'll be able to clear them out and clean them out. It's actually, I don't feel, a difficult process to conquer subtle weaknesses. If I trust myself, I'm open and I'm honest, and I really have the aim to take from Baba in an unlimited way, I don't think it's a difficult job at all. Let me really look inside and root out any weak thoughts for myself. And weak thoughts, it includes that little subtle comparison with others. It includes the subtle desires for something. It includes the subtle feelings of being insulted. It includes the, am I right or not? Am I good enough or not? We can have all those subtle commentaries going on inside. Sometimes they don't even emerge as far as thoughts. They just stay on the level of feeling. I'm not quite happy inside. Don't quite feel good. I feel a little bit left out here. I feel a little bit like I don't fit in here, It could just be on the level of feelings. It hasn't even emerged on the level of thoughts. But there's something, some weak thought inside that's attacking me. So let me sit and root it out. We don't need weak thoughts, and they're of no use to us. And they're not truth. These feelings are not truth. They're not gyan, they're not truth on any level. It's not real about me. How often have we had a waste thought about what we think somebody thinks of us, and they never even had a thought in their head. It was all my imagination. So these subtle weaknesses, weak thoughts, subtle mayas, is imagination. We live often in a world of imagination. Sit with yourself, root it out. You don't need it anymore, because it's stopping you taking the power from Baba that you need. And in that process, you'll also stop taking the sorrow. And one very good way to stop taking sorrow is to give happiness. Give the opposite. Give love, give happiness. Be especially loving to those ones who give you sorrow. They'll start to transform. And I guess the other subtle maya that can get to us, subtle attraction, subtle attachments, subtle dependencies. And I won't go too much into this. Our time is moving on. I want to spend time for questions too, but we can, again, looking at this, we can become dependent not only on people, but on these patterns of ways of working, ways of being. But I have to check myself. Do I really seek out another person's company, especially, and reject the company of another. Yes, to be with friends is fine. We all have our friends and we like to, be in their company. That's natural. There are some people you feel more comfortable with than others. It's natural. But where subtle Maya comes is where in that friendship I subtly exclude somebody. Maybe many people, but even one person. Then I'm creating a clique, if you like. I'm creating a kind of friendship that is going to give sorrow and make me dependent. And so be aware of this, that I don't become dependent or attached in that way. And of course the other thing is of the subtle attractions that can attack us at times. Again, if I'm working on that, a higher level, if you like, of self-sovereignty, the best way to conquer subtle, impure thoughts is to be in a state of self-sovereignty. If there's any kind of attraction, my self-sovereignty is completely finished. My dignity is finished. My self-respect is finished. There's no dignity in impurity. And what do I want in life? You're all sitting here because you want self-sovereignty, you want dignity. And then everything that you do will be with that royalty. And subtle Maya will keep away from a distance. So they were just a few thoughts on the theme. So I'd like to leave a little time for any comments or questions. Anybody want to ask anything or? All conquerors of Maya. It's great. Yeah. You have to speak loudly.
When you say that sometimes it's our imagination, then how can we really discern whether it is our imagination or it is the real thing?
Okay. A question, sometimes saying that things are our imagination. So how can we really discern whether it is our imagination or the real thing? First of all, I'd say if something's giving me sorrow, then there has to be something of imagination in that. Excuse me. Okay. And so I'm taking something in, I'm building it up in my mind in a certain way, and I'm feeling sorrow from it. Definitely something of imagination, because I've gone away from my real experience of the truth of who I am. And then there are other things of imagination that can make us, in a way, our ego can lead us into imagination that I'm better than, I'm better than so-and-so or whatever. Ego is a wonderful thing. Either it will give us that, in a gross way, feeling that, I know better, I know best, I'm the best instrument for this, etc., etc. So it'll give us that sort of egotistical feeling, and that's also imagination. Or ego is such a thing that will cause weak thoughts. That's also imagination. Because no matter how good I am at something, no matter how proficient, no matter how long I've been doing something, there's always somebody to teach me something at some point. I always need to be open to learn. And I think of course, one way is to verify with seniors, are these thoughts my imagination or are they real? Fine. But also, I've seen if something is really of truth, something is really right, either in what I'm doing in terms of my own stage, or what I'm doing in terms of service, or the way I'm interacting with my Lockett family or my at work or whatever, if something is really of truth and it's not imagination, then everybody will be content with that and with me. They'll be pleased with me. They'll be with me. It was very nice. This was in a conference recently, and this wasn't a Gyani person saying this, but they were saying that if you, now what were they saying? If you want to know if you have faith in yourself and faith in God, look and see whether your family is happy with you. And, this is something Baba tells us. Of course, he's referring to the Lockett family, but for us too, ultimately, are the Brahmin family happy with us? Is my Lockett family happy with me? When people are with me in what I'm doing, it's an indication that there isn't too much imagination going on inside. So this is the way I would answer that. Anything else? So I'd just say that when there are too many thoughts, there tends to be imagination. But when there are fewer thoughts, then they tend to be very yogyukt thoughts and thoughts of truth. When my mind is spinning, there's probably a lot of imagination going on there. Yeah, sorry, over here was... Okay, so the question is when we have those patterns of weaknesses or ways of doing things that we get used to, and then the method to really have that focused, real yoga. So what is the process to do that? Excuse me. I wouldn't even think too much about a process. And in fact, the word process can lead us to think that I have to go through things, I have to take time and then go through and somehow come out the other side. But where Baba's magic really works, and I really use Gyan, things happen quickly. And so if I see that there's a pattern I need to change, now as soon as I see that pattern, as soon as I have that thought, I need to change this, that in itself is a realization. It's not a process, it's a realization. Before, I didn't know that I had to change it. Now, I say, goodness, it's something I have to change. So it's a realization. Even that realization brings transformation. But then I remember Baba saying in a Borg message once that you have a realization, but you don't practice that realization. Now, once I have a realization, let me remind myself of that realization again and again and again, and put it in front of Baba, sit in front of Baba. Baba, okay, this is my realization. And if there's a real realization, feel excited about it. Don't feel, I realized I've got this weak thought, oh, now what, our face can go. I realized I have this weakness. Great, I can get rid of it. Be happy that you've realized something. I can learn, I can move ahead. And if you're happy about it, your ego won't pull you back. But where you start to think, oh no, what can I do? How can I change it? That's your ego wanting to keep you in that weakness. But get rid of that ego and say, okay, great, now I can move ahead. Fantastic. And then put it in front of Baba. And then, yes, lose yourself in Baba's remembrance. Go with that happiness to Baba. Baba, today this is my realization. And go with that happiness to Baba and free yourself. And then be aware that the sanskar can come back. So practice practice the realization until really the sanskaras just, you can't even remember it. When you really conquered something. Did I have that? Was it? It's like way back in another life. It's like, don't even remember it. So have that happiness and let it. Enjoy that effort. Enjoy moving ahead. Enjoy learning. Enjoy growing. That's our life. Anything else?